You're early.
4 hours early.
You didn't sign this.
Then this was never just an affair.
Brandon Flores was 41, a senior corporate compliance analyst in Seattle who looked more like a quiet office worker than someone who spent his career uncovering fraud. Most people believed he was too calm to fight for anything, while friends joked that Aurora Flores always made the decisions at home. He drove the same gray Toyota Camry, packed his own lunch every morning, and stopped at the same coffee shop before work. What they didn't know was that Brandon had built his entire career on one principle: never move before the evidence was complete. When a canceled federal briefing sent him home 4 hours early, he noticed Aurora's SUV, an unfamiliar black pickup, in the driveway, and laughter behind the locked master bathroom door. His fingers closed around the brass doorknob just as the water splashed inside. If you're watching from somewhere in the world today, let me know your country and your local time. In the comments, I always enjoy seeing where these stories reach. And if you enjoy realistic, slow-burning stories where patience is stronger than revenge, consider subscribing. Tomorrow's story might be the one you won't be able to stop thinking about. The brass doorknob turned without resistance. For a brief second, Brandon Flores wondered if he had imagined everything. The laughter stopped. The music continued playing through a waterproof Bluetooth speaker balanced beside the marble sink. Steam drifted through the oversized master bathroom, softening the afternoon sunlight that spilled through the frosted window overlooking their backyard. Then the steam shifted. Aurora sat inside the freestanding soaking tub. Across from her, only inches away, was Ethan Brooks, Brandon's oldest friend. The man he had known for nearly 25 years, the man who had stood beside him at his wedding. Neither of them noticed Brandon immediately. Aurora's back was turned. Ethan was leaning against the opposite side of the tub, holding a wine glass between his fingers, laughing about something that suddenly no longer seemed funny. The silence lasted barely 3 seconds. Aurora looked toward the doorway. The color disappeared from her face. The glass slipped from Ethan's hand and shattered against the white tile floor. Nobody spoke. Brandon didn't blink. His breathing slowed instead of quickening. His shoulders remained level. Only his fingers betrayed him. They tightened around the doorknob until the tendons stood out beneath his skin. Aurora reached instinctively for a towel. "Brandon," her voice cracked. "It isn't—" He raised one hand. Not aggressively. Just enough to stop the sentence before it was born. Ethan climbed halfway out of the tub. "Listen, man." Brandon looked directly at him. The stare lasted less than 2 seconds. It was empty, not furious, not broken, simply empty. That frightened Ethan more than shouting ever could. The room suddenly felt much colder. Water dripped slowly onto the tile. The Bluetooth speaker continued playing soft jazz, absurdly cheerful against the silence. Aurora wrapped the towel around herself. "You came home early." Another pointless sentence. Brandon answered with exactly 4 words. "The meeting was canceled." Nothing else. No accusations, no insults, no questions. He stepped backward into the hallway. Aurora hurried after him. "Please, just let me explain." He kept walking. Down the hallway. Past the family photographs. Past the framed wedding portrait hanging near the staircase. He noticed details he had never paid attention to before. The photograph from Maui. The anniversary picture taken at Pike Place Market. The smiling faces. The matching wedding bands. Everything suddenly looked like evidence instead of memories. Behind him, Ethan called out, "Brandon, don't leave like this." No answer. He walked downstairs, picked up his car keys from the ceramic bowl beside the entrance, opened the front door, closed it quietly behind him. No slamming, no dramatic exit, only silence. The July air felt strangely cool despite the afternoon sun. Brandon climbed into his gray Toyota Camry. He didn't start the engine. His hands rested on the steering wheel. The house stood perfectly still in front of him. From the outside, it looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Green lawn, fresh mulch around the flower beds, American flag moving gently beside the porch. Nothing suggested that the marriage inside had ended less than 2 minutes earlier. He remained there. 5 minutes? 10? 15? His smartwatch vibrated twice with work notifications. He ignored both. Instead, he watched the upstairs bathroom window. Nobody appeared. His heartbeat gradually settled. Years of compliance investigations had conditioned him against immediate reactions. Every fraud investigation began with one rule. People destroyed themselves when someone else stayed calm. He repeated that sentence inside his head. Again and again. Finally, he started the engine. He didn't drive toward his office. He didn't drive to Ethan's condominium. He didn't call his parents. He didn't call Aurora. Instead, he pulled into the parking lot of a quiet Starbucks near South Lake Union. He ordered black coffee, found the most isolated table in the corner, opened his phone, scrolled through his contacts. His thumb stopped beside one name, Victoria Bennett, family law attorney. The contact had been saved 3 years earlier after helping a coworker through an ugly divorce. Brandon pressed call. She answered after the second ring. Victoria Bennett. My name is Brandon Flores. A brief pause. How can I help you, Mr. Flores? My wife is having an affair. Another pause. Then Victoria's voice became noticeably calmer. Did you just discover it? About 20 minutes ago? Are you safe? Yes. Did anyone become violent? No. Did you threaten either of them? No. Good. She didn't sound surprised. She sounded experienced. I need you to answer exactly what I ask. Brandon nodded before realizing she couldn't see him. All right. Did you take photographs? No. Any video? No. Any witnesses? No. Victoria inhaled quietly. That's fine. She continued speaking in an even rhythm. Listen carefully, Brandon. He leaned forward. I know what you're feeling. She paused. But your emotions are the most dangerous evidence in the room right now. Brandon remained silent. If you send angry texts, if you threaten anyone, if you damage property, if you touch either one of them, you change the story. She allowed the sentence to settle. Right now, you're the betrayed husband. Stay that way. Brandon looked through the cafe window. Cars passed along Westlake Avenue. Nobody outside knew his world had collapsed. What do I do? Victoria answered immediately. You preserve. Preserve what? Everything. She began listing items one by one. The house. The financial records. The phone bills. Emails. Shared bank accounts. Retirement accounts. Security camera footage. Credit card statements. Insurance policies. Tax returns. Everything. Brandon listened without interrupting. Do not tell her you're hiring me. Do not announce you're filing. Do not negotiate. Do not argue. Say as little as possible. He finally asked the question that mattered. Why? Victoria answered with one sentence. Because guilty people become careless when they think they've already won. The words landed harder than any lecture. Brandon wrote them into the Notes app on his phone. What about tonight? Don't stay there. I have nowhere to go. There are dozens of hotels downtown. Check in. Save every receipt. Tomorrow morning we begin. Brandon stared at the untouched coffee. I understand. No, Victoria corrected him gently. You don't. You will. Starting tomorrow, your marriage becomes a legal case. Treat it like one. The call ended. Brandon remained seated another 15 minutes. Then he opened a hotel booking application. The Harbor Grand Hotel near Elliott Bay had one available room. King bed, 3 nights. He reserved it immediately. When he finally drove away from the coffee shop, he didn't pass his own neighborhood again. Aurora stood in the living room when Brandon returned, just long enough to collect a small suitcase. She had changed into jeans and a cream sweater. Her hair was still damp. Her eyes were swollen. "Can we please talk?" Brandon walked upstairs, opened the bedroom closet, removed exactly 5 dress shirts, 1 navy suit, 2 pairs of slacks, casual clothes, toiletries, laptop, phone charger, nothing more. Aurora followed him. "I made a mistake." He folded another shirt. It meant nothing. He zipped one side of the suitcase. "It was over before today." He placed socks inside a side compartment. She stepped closer. "Say something." Finally, Brandon looked at her. His expression remained unreadable. "I already did." She frowned. When I walked out." He lifted the suitcase, walked past her. She reached toward his arm. He stopped. Not because of her hand, because he had remembered something. He removed his wedding ring, placed it carefully on the bedroom dresser. Not thrown, not dropped. Placed. Then he walked downstairs without looking back. Aurora stood frozen beside the dresser. For the first time since the affair had been discovered, uncertainty replaced confidence. She expected shouting. She expected broken furniture. She expected desperate questions. Instead, she received silence, and silence gave her nothing she could control. Brandon drove toward downtown Seattle as evening settled over Elliott Bay. Behind him, the house remained quiet. Ahead of him, a single phone call had already begun changing everything. Brandon slept less than 3 hours. Not because he replayed the image in the bathtub. His mind had already begun doing something far more familiar. It was organizing facts. At 6:30 the following morning, he opened the curtains of his hotel room on the 18th floor of the Harbor Grand overlooking Elliott Bay. Ferries crossed the water toward Bainbridge Island while commuters filled Alaskan Way below. Seattle looked unchanged. His life was not. He showered, pressed his navy dress shirt, made the bed before leaving. Old habits remained intact. During 20 years in compliance, Brandon had learned that discipline was easiest to maintain on the days it felt impossible. He carried his laptop downstairs, ordered oatmeal and black coffee. Instead of reading the news, he opened a spreadsheet. The first tab read Personal Timeline. The second, Financial Accounts. The third, Business Travel. The fourth, Questions. Nothing more. He typed the first entry, July 14th. Federal cybersecurity briefing canceled. Returned home at approximately 2:18 p.m. Observed Aurora and Ethan together. Left residence. Contacted attorney Victoria Bennett at 3:07 p.m. Hotel reservation confirmed at 4:02 p.m. He stopped typing. Every investigation began with chronology. Memory faded. Documents did not. At exactly 8 o'clock, his phone rang. Victoria Bennett. "Good morning, Brandon." "Morning." "Did Aurora contact you?" He checked his phone. 23 unread messages. 9 missed calls. Most came from Aurora. 3 from Ethan. 1 from an unknown number. "I haven't answered." "Good." Victoria sounded pleased. "Don't delete anything." "I won't." "Forward screenshots of every message to me." "I'll do that." "And Brandon." "Yes. Read them. But don't respond." The first message arrived 22 minutes after he left the house. "Please come back." The second, "We need to talk." The third, "This isn't what it looked like." The fourth, "I'm sorry." The fifth, "Please answer me." As the evening progressed, the messages became longer, more emotional, more desperate. Then came Ethan's texts. "Brother, let me explain. Please don't make assumptions. Call me. You deserve the truth." Brandon saved screenshots of every message. He labeled the folder Communication After Discovery. No emotion, only organization. Victoria met him inside her downtown office overlooking 4th Avenue. She was in her early 50s, dressed in a charcoal suit with silver reading glasses resting low on her nose. Legal files covered nearly every surface. She shook Brandon's hand firmly. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." "So am I." She motioned toward a conference room. For nearly 2 hours, she asked questions. Not emotional questions, practical ones. "When did you marry?" 10 years ago. "Children?" "No." "Joint checking?" "Yes." "Separate retirement accounts?" "Yes." "Mortgage?" "Shared." "Prenuptial agreement?" "No." Every answer became another note. Then Victoria folded her hands. "Now let's discuss something many people overlook." Brandon waited. Affairs rarely stay isolated. He looked up. "What do you mean?" "They often overlap with financial decisions." She leaned slightly forward. "People hiding one secret frequently hide others." The sentence lingered. Brandon thought about it. Aurora had always handled household shopping. She occasionally transferred money between accounts. Nothing unusual. Or so he had believed. Victoria slid a yellow legal pad across the table. "I want copies of 5 years of financial records." 5? "Yes." "That's excessive." "No." She smiled faintly. "It's thorough." Back at the hotel, Brandon logged into every financial account they shared. Checking, savings, retirement, brokerage, mortgage, credit cards. Nothing immediately looked alarming. Balances appeared normal. Monthly expenses seemed predictable. Electricity, internet, insurance, groceries, restaurant charges, streaming subscriptions. He almost closed the laptop. Then something caught his attention. A recurring electronic transfer. $2,000. Every second Friday. Destination North Cascade Capital LLC. Brandon frowned. He didn't recognize the company. He searched old emails. Nothing. Investment documents. Nothing. Tax returns? Nothing. He opened another browser. The company existed. Registered 18 months earlier. Small investment advisory business. Tacoma address. No website. Minimal public information. He wrote the name down. Question number 1. Why were they sending money there? Another transfer appeared. $7,500. 3 months earlier. Same destination. Then another. 5,000. Another. 3,500. Individually, they seemed ordinary. Together, they exceeded $40,000. Brandon checked authorization history. Every transfer had originated from Aurora's online banking credentials. His signature wasn't required because the money came from their joint checking account. His stomach tightened. Not from anger, from recognition. He had seen similar patterns in fraud investigations. Large theft rarely happened once. It happened gradually. Small amounts. Repeated often enough that nobody noticed. His phone vibrated. Aurora, again. He ignored it. Voicemail followed immediately. He almost deleted it. Instead, he remembered Victoria's instruction, preserve everything. He listened. Brandon. Aurora's voice sounded exhausted. I know you're angry. I understand if you hate me. But please don't shut me out. Ethan wants to explain. We both do. I promise nothing else is happening. I swear. The recording ended. Brandon replayed one sentence. Nothing else is happening. He wrote it inside his notebook. Potential contradiction, not because he knew she was lying, because statements should always be compared with evidence. That afternoon, Brandon visited their bank branch near downtown Seattle, not to withdraw money, to request complete account statements. The branch manager recognized him. Everything all right, Mr. Flores? Just organizing my financial records. No problem. 40 minutes later, he left carrying a thick envelope. Statements covering 60 months. Exactly what Victoria requested. Back inside his hotel room, he began reading. January, February, March, page after page. Most people would have skimmed. Brandon didn't. Years in compliance had trained his eyes to notice repetition. By evening, he found something else. Restaurant charges. Not expensive ones. Just consistent. The same Italian restaurant. Bella Toscana. Almost always on Thursdays. Almost always during weeks, Brandon traveled for work. He opened his work calendar. Business trip, Chicago, restaurant charge. Business trip, Denver, restaurant charge. Business trip, Phoenix, restaurant charge. Again. His pulse slowed. Patterns mattered. Individual events could be coincidence. Repeated events became evidence. Another discovery came just before midnight. Home security logs. The Flores residence used a smart security system that automatically recorded every entry. Brandon downloaded 6 months of access history. Most entries belonged to him. Aurora. Package deliveries. Cleaning service. Then another name appeared. Guest access. He clicked. Temporary digital code. Activated 29 separate times. Each activation occurred while Brandon was traveling. Duration of visits ranged from 1 hour to 6 hours. Brandon checked location history from his work calendar. Every single visit matched one of his overnight business trips. He leaned back in his chair. 29 visits. Not once, not twice. 29. He still didn't know whether Ethan had used that code, but he knew one thing. Someone had. And Aurora had never mentioned creating guest access for anyone. He exported the logs, saved 3 separate backups: cloud storage, external hard drive, encrypted USB drive. Old habits. Never trust one copy. At 9 the following morning, Brandon met Victoria again. She quietly reviewed the security logs. Then the bank statements. Then the restaurant charges. She removed her glasses. This is no longer just about infidelity. Brandon looked at her. You think so? I do. She tapped the repeated transfers. I want another professional involved. Who? A forensic accountant. Someone who follows money the way detectives follow fingerprints. She reached for her phone. His name is Daniel Harper. He's one of the best financial investigators in Washington. What happens now? Victoria smiled slightly. Now we stop guessing. We start proving. Outside her office window, rain clouds drifted across downtown Seattle. For the first time since opening the bathroom door, Brandon felt something replacing shock. Not hope, not relief, purpose. Somewhere inside 5 years of financial records, 29 security logs, and dozens of unexplained transfers, another story was waiting. And he intended to find every page of it. Daniel Harper looked nothing like the forensic accountants Brandon had imagined. Instead of an expensive suit, he wore dark jeans, a blue Oxford shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his elbows, and rectangular glasses that constantly slid down the bridge of his nose. His gray hair was cut short, and his calm expression suggested someone who had spent decades solving problems no one else could see. Victoria introduced them inside her conference room. Daniel, she said, this is Brandon Flores. Daniel stood and extended his hand. I'm sorry we have to meet under circumstances like these. Brandon shook it. So am I. Victoria gathered several folders before placing them in front of Daniel. 5 years of statements. Joint accounts. Security logs. Known transfers. Daniel glanced at the stacks without opening them. Good. You've already done more work than most clients. He looked toward Brandon. You organize information well. It's my job. Daniel smiled. That will save us weeks. For the next 3 hours, the conference room became completely silent except for the sound of pages turning. Daniel didn't skim, he read. Every transfer, every deposit, every withdrawal, every credit card payment. Occasionally, he circled something with a mechanical pencil. Occasionally, he wrote a short note. Nothing more. Brandon noticed something familiar. Daniel approached financial records exactly the way Brandon approached compliance investigations. Neither of them searched for dramatic discoveries. They searched for patterns. Finally, Daniel leaned back. Interesting. Victoria looked up. What? Daniel tapped the recurring transfers to North Cascade Capital LLC. These aren't investment contributions. How can you tell? They're too consistent. He drew several circles around the amounts. 2,000, 2,000, 2,000, 3,000. Then back to 2. He slid the pages toward Brandon. Real investments fluctuate. Monthly contributions usually correspond to payroll retirement planning or portfolio adjustments. These don't. So what are they? Daniel answered immediately. They look like scheduled extraction. Brandon frowned. Extraction, Daniel nodded. Money leaving quietly. Just enough that most spouses never notice. He opened his laptop. Within minutes, he had connected to several public financial databases. North Cascade Capital LLC appeared again. Minimal corporate filings, registered 18 months earlier. Single managing member, no employees listed, no investment licenses, no public advertising. Daniel looked at Victoria. This isn't an investment company. What is it? A shell. Brandon spoke for the first time in several minutes. You mean fake? Not exactly. Daniel rotated the laptop. A shell company can be legal. Sorry. But it's often used to move money without attracting attention. He enlarged another document. The registered mailing address belongs to a virtual office. No permanent staff. No operating location. No public clients. Victoria folded her arms. So, where's the money going? Daniel answered quietly. That's exactly what we're about to find out. Over the next week, Brandon settled into a new routine. Every morning he left the hotel at 7. Breakfast, coffee, Victoria's office, Daniel's temporary workspace, then hours of reviewing records. He almost forgot why the investigation had started. Instead of thinking about the affair, he found himself asking entirely different questions. Who created North Cascade Capital? Why had Aurora transferred so much money? Did she understand where it was going? Or had someone instructed her? The emotional pain never disappeared. It simply moved into the background while facts occupied the foreground. Aurora continued calling, sometimes twice a day, sometimes 15 times. She also sent emails. One read, I know you don't believe me, but Ethan said these investments would help us retire early. Please don't assume I stole from you. I thought everything was legitimate. Brandon read the message 3 times. He didn't answer. Instead, he forwarded it to Victoria. 10 minutes later, she called. That email is important. Why? If she's telling the truth, it establishes something. What? She admits making the transfers, but she claims someone advised her. Brandon remained quiet. Victoria continued. Never assume she's innocent. But never assume she's guilty either. The evidence decides. Daniel's investigation accelerated. Using publicly available business filings, he mapped every company connected to North Cascade Capital. The chart quickly became complicated. One company owned another. That company owned a third. Addresses repeated. Registered agents repeated. Phone numbers repeated. Brandon stared at the screen. It looks intentional. It is. Daniel highlighted 3 businesses. North Cascade Capital, Harbor Ridge Consulting, Blue Summit Holdings. They're connected. Same formation attorney. Same registered office. Same filing pattern. Victoria looked at Brandon. Do any of these names sound familiar? He shook his head. No. Then Daniel enlarged another document. One name appeared. Managing Consultant Ethan Brooks. Nobody spoke. Brandon read the line again. Then again. The room became completely still. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. So Ethan wasn't just having an affair. Daniel nodded slowly. No. He was connected financially. Brandon expected anger. Instead, he felt disappointment. The affair had already destroyed trust. Now every shared financial decision became questionable. He remembered conversations from the previous year. Ethan recommending investment opportunities during backyard barbecues. Aurora praising Ethan's business knowledge. Casual discussions about retirement, vacation homes, passive income. At the time, they sounded harmless. Now every conversation carried a different meaning. Late that afternoon, Daniel called Brandon into his office. I found something. He pointed toward a spreadsheet. I traced one of Aurora's transfers. Where did it go? It didn't stay inside North Cascade. Daniel clicked another tab. The money moved again 48 hours later. To another account. Then another. Then disappeared. Brandon leaned closer. Can you follow it? Partially. Daniel highlighted the final destination. Commercial real estate purchase. Tacoma, Warehouse District. Purchase price. $380,000. Brandon stared at the screen. Whose property? Daniel sighed. That's the interesting part. It wasn't purchased by Ethan. Then who? A limited liability company. What company? Daniel looked directly at Brandon. Harbor Ridge Consulting. The same company Ethan manages. Victoria arrived minutes later. Daniel summarized everything. Repeated transfers, shell companies, commercial property, Ethan's involvement. When he finished, Victoria remained silent. Finally, she said one sentence. This changes our legal strategy. Brandon looked toward her. How? We're no longer discussing hidden marital assets. We're discussing possible fraudulent concealment. He frowned. Meaning, if marital money was intentionally hidden through shell companies during your marriage, she paused. The court takes that very seriously. That evening, Brandon returned to the hotel carrying another box of records. Instead of turning on the television, he spread documents across the desk. One statement caught his attention. Home equity loan. Approved 11 months earlier. Amount, $120,000. His signature appeared electronically. He frowned. He didn't remember authorizing it. He opened another folder. Loan closing documents. Most signatures looked normal. One page stopped him cold. The signature looked like his. Almost. Close enough that many people would never notice. Different enough that Brandon immediately recognized the tiny differences. His capital B leaned farther forward. The final S in Flores ended too sharply. He compared it with another document he had signed personally. Not identical, not even close. His heartbeat quickened for the first time all week. He photographed every page, then called Victoria. She answered immediately. What happened? I think someone signed my name. She became completely silent. Email everything. Now. An hour later, Brandon sat across from Victoria and Daniel once again. The documents lay between them. Daniel adjusted his glasses. I've examined thousands of signatures. He compared both pages side by side. Then looked at Brandon. I can't make a legal conclusion, but if you asked whether I'd investigate this further, I absolutely would. Victoria slowly closed the folder. This keeps getting worse. Brandon stared at the paperwork. So someone may have forged my signature. Possibly. And used our home as collateral. Possibly. He leaned back in his chair. The affair suddenly seemed almost secondary. The marriage had hidden far more than betrayal. It had hidden financial decisions capable of changing the rest of his life. Victoria picked up her phone. I think it's time we involve another specialist. Who? A certified forensic document examiner. Daniel nodded in agreement. And Brandon? He tapped the forged signature gently. From this moment forward, Assume every document deserves to be questioned. Brandon looked once more at the signature bearing his own name. For years he had believed his marriage rested on trust. Now every page he opened raised another question. And somewhere beneath thousands of transactions, hidden companies, and suspicious signatures, the truth was becoming larger than any of them had imagined. The rain arrived before sunrise. Thin sheets of water rolled across the windows of Brandon's hotel room as downtown Seattle slowly came to life beneath a blanket of gray clouds. He had once enjoyed mornings like this. Rain had always made the city feel calmer, quieter, easier to think in. Now it simply matched his mood. He sat at the small desk near the window, reviewing Daniel Harper's latest report for the third time. Every page pointed in the same direction. Money had moved, companies had been created, documents had been signed, and Ethan Brooks appeared somewhere in the middle of nearly every path. Brandon closed the folder. There was no satisfaction in proving his best friend had betrayed him, only clarity. His phone buzzed. Another message from Aurora. This one was shorter than the others. Please don't let strangers decide what happened between us. He stared at the words for several seconds. Then he locked the phone without replying. Victoria had been right. Every unanswered message revealed more than an emotional argument ever could. At 9 o'clock, Brandon arrived at Daniel's temporary office. A large whiteboard now covered one wall. Dozens of company names were connected by blue and red marker lines. Addresses, bank accounts, corporate officers, property records. It resembled an organized spiderweb. Daniel noticed Brandon studying it. Looks overwhelming. It does. It won't once you understand the pattern. He handed Brandon a fresh cup of coffee. Come here. Daniel pointed toward Harbor Ridge Consulting. This company paid consulting fees. Then he traced another line. Those fees were transferred to Blue Summit Holdings. Another line. Which purchased commercial property. Another. And leased that property back to another company. Brandon frowned. Why? To create legitimate-looking revenue. Daniel paused, or at least the appearance of it. Victoria entered moments later carrying another file. I have something from public records. She laid several printed pages on the table. Ethan incorporated Harbor Ridge 4 years ago. Daniel looked surprised. 4. I thought it was newer. Victoria shook her head. The shell companies are newer. The business itself isn't. She tapped another page. He originally registered it as a consulting firm. No employees. No office. No meaningful income. Daniel slowly nodded. Then 18 months ago. He built the rest? Brandon looked at the incorporation date. 4 years. Long before the affair. That realization settled heavily over him. This hadn't begun with one terrible decision. It had been growing quietly for years. He remembered Ethan talking enthusiastically about entrepreneurship, about financial freedom, about leaving corporate life behind. Everyone had admired his ambition, including Brandon. Looking back, the conversation sounded different, not dishonest, calculated. Daniel opened another spreadsheet. I've been comparing Ethan's company activity with your work travel. Brandon looked up. Why? Because timing matters. He clicked through several columns. Business conference, Chicago. Harbor Ridge received $15,000. Compliance seminar, Denver, another payment. Federal training, Washington, D.C., another payment. The dates aligned almost perfectly. Victoria folded her arms. What does that tell us? Daniel answered carefully. It tells us someone preferred moving money while Brandon was out of town. That doesn't prove criminal intent. But it certainly attracts attention. Brandon studied the calendar. So, every time I traveled, someone was busy. Daniel nodded once. That's how it appears. Later that afternoon, Brandon drove toward the Tacoma warehouse district. Not to confront anyone, simply to see the property. Daniel had advised against entering. Victoria had agreed. Observe. Don't interact. The warehouse stood at the end of an aging industrial street, surrounded by trucking companies and storage facilities. Nothing about it appeared remarkable. A faded gray building, roll-up loading doors, chain-link fencing, no visible company logo. Brandon parked across the street. He watched for nearly 40 minutes. Delivery trucks came and went. 2 employees unlocked a side entrance. A white cargo van arrived shortly after noon. Then Brandon noticed a familiar black SUV. Aurora's. She parked beside the warehouse. His heartbeat slowed. She stepped out carrying a large envelope. Not shopping bags, not lunch, documents. She walked inside without hesitation. 5 minutes later, another vehicle pulled into the lot. Ethan's silver BMW. He entered through the same door. Brandon reached for his phone, not to call them, to record the time, 11:47. M. Aurora entered warehouse, 11:52 a.m. Ethan arrived. He photographed both vehicles from across the street. Nothing illegal, only documentation. 20 minutes later, he quietly drove away. Daniel examined the photographs that evening. They're useful. They prove they met. They don't prove why. Brandon nodded. I know. Daniel smiled faintly. And that's exactly why they're valuable. You didn't assume. You documented. Victoria looked pleased. Judges appreciate timelines. So do investigators. The following morning, an unexpected phone call interrupted their meeting. The caller identified himself as Michael Grant, a senior ethics officer for one of the regional engineering firms Ethan occasionally consulted for. I'm looking for Brandon Flores. This is Brandon. I understand you and Ethan Brooks know each other. Brandon glanced toward Victoria before answering. We've known each other for years. I see. There was a brief pause. We're conducting an internal review involving one of our vendors. We found your name listed as a professional reference several years ago. Brandon chose every word carefully. I haven't worked with Ethan professionally. I understand. Would you be willing to answer a few factual questions? Victoria quietly mouthed one sentence. Facts only. Brandon nodded almost invisibly. Yes. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. Michael asked about Ethan's consulting background, how long they had known each other, whether Brandon had ever invested in Harbor Ridge Consulting. The final question caught Brandon's attention. Have you ever authorized Ethan Brooks to act on your behalf in any financial matter? Brandon answered immediately. No. Michael thanked him politely, then ended the call. The room remained silent afterward. Victoria was the first to speak. They're asking the right questions. Daniel agreed. If an ethics office is reviewing vendor relationships, they've already noticed irregularities. Brandon looked between them. Because of us? Victoria shook her head. Not necessarily. Large organizations perform routine audits, but once questions begin, they rarely stay contained. That evening, Brandon reviewed another batch of emails recovered from his archived account. Most involved ordinary conversations. Holiday plans, dinner invitations, fantasy football. Then one message from nearly 2 years earlier caught his eye. It was from Ethan. Subject, quick favor. The email read, Hey Brandon, Aurora mentioned you're traveling next week. If she needs help with anything around the house, don't worry. I'll stop by and check on things. Brandon remembered reading it. At the time, it had seemed thoughtful. Now he opened the home security log for the same weeks. Guest access activated. 3 hours. He closed his eyes. The evidence wasn't proving a single affair. It was revealing a pattern of trust that had been quietly exploited for years. The next morning, Daniel arrived carrying another folder. I think we've reached an important point. What did you find? Daniel placed several corporate filings on the table. Harbor Ridge Consulting submitted annual reports. So, every report lists Ethan as managing consultant. He turned another page. Every banking authorization requires 2 approved signatures. Brandon looked confused. 2? Yes. Daniel pointed toward a name typed beneath Ethan's. Authorized Financial Officer Aurora Flores. The room became completely silent. Victoria slowly lowered the document onto the conference table. Well? She exhaled quietly. Now we know she wasn't merely transferring money. Brandon stared at Aurora's name. He wanted to believe there had been some misunderstanding, some explanation that would separate the affair from the finances. With one document, that hope became much smaller. Daniel carefully gathered the papers back into their folder. We still don't know whether Aurora understood everything she was signing. Victoria nodded. And until we know, we make no assumptions. Brandon looked once more at the signature line bearing his wife's name. Days earlier, he had believed he was preparing for a painful divorce. Now he realized he might also be uncovering a financial scheme that extended far beyond the collapse of his marriage. And somewhere ahead, the answers were beginning to attract attention from people outside their small circle. People with authority. People who followed evidence exactly the way Brandon always had. By the second week, Brandon's routine had become almost mechanical. Wake at 6, review notes over breakfast, meet Victoria at 9, spend the afternoon with Daniel, return to the hotel after sunset, organize every new document before sleeping. He had never intended to live out of a hotel room, but the quiet suited him. There were no arguments waiting behind the door, no awkward silences, no reminders of a marriage that had collapsed in a single afternoon. Instead, there were folders, timelines, evidence, facts. The emotional pain hadn't disappeared. It had simply learned to wait its turn. Aurora continued reaching out. Her messages had changed. The panic of the first few days was gone. Now they carried a different tone. Brandon, please meet me once. I'm not asking you to forgive me, just listen. Another arrived an hour later. You deserve to know everything. He forwarded each one to Victoria without opening a conversation. She called him immediately. Has she mentioned the companies? No. The money? No. Ethan? Only once. Victoria made another note. Interesting. What is? She's trying to discuss the relationship, not the finances. Brandon thought about that. He hadn't noticed. Now he couldn't ignore it. Daniel was waiting when Brandon arrived. A satellite image of Tacoma filled the large monitor. I've been mapping Harbor Ridge's activity. He zoomed toward the warehouse. The building itself isn't unusual. So what is? Daniel clicked another window. Truck registrations, delivery schedules, lease agreements, warehouse occupancy reports. Most companies occupying industrial buildings receive shipments every weekday. Harbor Ridge did not. Its deliveries appeared random. Sometimes 3 in one day, sometimes nothing for 2 weeks. Daniel circled several dates. Whatever they do here, it isn't traditional warehousing. Brandon studied the screen. What do you think they're storing? Daniel smiled faintly. I don't know. And I won't guess. He turned toward Brandon. Remember something. In my profession, the moment you fall in love with a theory, you stop seeing the facts. Brandon nodded. It sounded exactly like something he would have said to a junior compliance analyst. That afternoon, Victoria called with unexpected news. The petition is ready. Brandon looked up. So soon? You hired me to protect you. I won't delay. She handed him the completed divorce filing. He flipped through the pages slowly. 10 years of marriage summarized in legal language. Names, dates, property, financial disclosures, grounds for dissolution. The words felt strangely impersonal. Perhaps they had to. Victoria watched him carefully. "You don't have to file today." Brandon looked at her. "I've already lost my marriage." "I'm only deciding when to acknowledge it legally." She gave a small nod. "I'll have everything prepared." As Brandon left the office, his phone rang. The caller ID displayed a familiar name, Brandon Flores, his younger sister. He hadn't spoken to her since the day before discovering the affair. He answered. "Hey." Her voice was soft. "I've been worried." "I'm okay." "No." She sighed. "You're surviving." "That's different." Brandon smiled, despite himself. Megan had always known him too well. "When are you coming home?" "I don't know." "You've been hiding in that hotel for almost 2 weeks." "I'm working." "I know." Another pause. "But Brandon, you don't have to carry everything alone." He looked out across Elliott Bay. "I'll visit soon." "You promise?" "I promise." The following morning, Daniel entered carrying a thick envelope. "I received additional corporate filings." "Anything useful?" "More than useful." He emptied dozens of papers onto the conference table. Employee tax records, business insurance policies, vendor contracts. Brandon immediately noticed something missing. "There are almost no employees." "Exactly." Daniel pointed toward payroll summaries. Ethan reported less than 2 full-time employees. "But the company handled hundreds of thousands of dollars." Victoria frowned. "That's unusual." Daniel nodded. Legitimate consulting firms usually spend heavily on payroll. Harbor Ridge barely does. He circled another figure. "Most of the money leaves through consulting expenses." "Consulting to whom?" Daniel smiled. "That's today's question." Hours later, he found the answer. Not complete, but enough. 3 recurring payments, each directed toward different contractors. One company no longer existed. One had been dissolved. The third remained active. Evergreen Strategic Solutions. Daniel searched state records, registered owner, Olivia Mercer. Neither Brandon nor Victoria recognized the name. Daniel opened LinkedIn. The profile appeared immediately. Olivia Mercer, independent business consultant. Previous employment, Brooks Engineering Group. Brandon leaned forward. "Ethan's old company." Daniel nodded. "They worked together." Victoria folded her arms. "So, Harbor Ridge keeps paying someone from Ethan's professional network." Daniel clicked another page. "Not just paying. Paying every month." Brandon felt the investigation expanding. Each answer produced 2 new questions. Every document introduced another unfamiliar name, another company, another financial trail. He finally understood why fraud investigations sometimes lasted years. Complexity wasn't accidental. It was protection. That afternoon, Brandon decided to retrieve the remainder of his belongings from the house. Victoria advised him to notify her before going. "If anything unusual happens, call me." He arrived shortly after 3. The neighborhood looked exactly as it always had. Children rode bicycles, neighbors trimmed hedges, dogs barked behind wooden fences. No one would have guessed the storm hidden inside one particular house. Brandon unlocked the front door. Silence greeted him. Aurora wasn't home. He walked upstairs. The bedroom remained almost untouched. His wedding ring still rested exactly where he had left it. Aurora hadn't moved it. He looked at it for several seconds, then closed the drawer without touching it. He packed several books, personal journals, family photographs from before the marriage, his late father's watch, nothing else. As he zipped the final bag, he noticed an envelope tucked inside Aurora's desk drawer. It wasn't sealed. His name wasn't written on it. Inside sat several receipts. Most appeared ordinary: gas stations, restaurants, office supplies. Then one receipt caught his attention: Tacoma Executive Storage. Monthly unit rental, paid by Harbor Ridge Consulting. He photographed it immediately. Another piece, another connection. As Brandon walked downstairs, movement outside caught his attention. A silver BMW stopped across the street. Ethan. For a brief moment, neither man moved. The distance between them was less than 50 yards. Months earlier, Brandon would have crossed the street without hesitation. Now he simply watched. Ethan stepped from the car slowly. He raised one hand, not aggressively, more like someone asking permission. Brandon remained where he was. Ethan finally spoke. "I've been trying to reach you." No answer. "I know you hate me." Still nothing. "But there are things you don't understand." Brandon looked directly at him. His voice remained calm. "Then tell your attorney." Ethan blinked. "What?" "My attorney will speak with yours." He turned toward his car. "Brandon." Brandon stopped, without looking back. Ethan's voice sounded different now, less confident. "You think this is only about Aurora?" Brandon remained silent. "It isn't?" Those 3 words lingered in the afternoon air. Brandon slowly turned. Ethan looked exhausted. His expensive clothes were wrinkled. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. For the first time since the affair had been discovered, he looked frightened. "What does that mean?" Brandon asked. Ethan opened his mouth, then looked toward the houses around them. He lowered his voice. "There are people involved who don't care about your marriage." "They care about the money." Brandon's expression never changed. "If that's true, you should tell investigators." Ethan took one hesitant step forward. "You don't understand what you're walking into." Brandon answered quietly. "I understand enough." He climbed into his Camry. As he drove away, he watched Ethan in the rearview mirror. His former best friend remained standing in the middle of the quiet suburban street, growing smaller with every passing second. Back at Victoria's office, Brandon described the conversation word for word. She wrote every sentence into her notebook. When he finished, she underlined Ethan's final statement. "There are people involved who don't care about your marriage." Victoria looked at Daniel. "I think we've reached the point where this investigation becomes larger than a divorce." Daniel nodded slowly. "I was beginning to think the same thing." Brandon looked at both of them. "So what happens now?" Victoria closed her notebook. "Now we find out who those people are." Neither of them realized that before the week was over, someone else had already begun watching Brandon's investigation, just as carefully as he had been watching theirs. Brandon noticed the black SUV 2 days later. At first, it meant nothing. Seattle traffic was filled with dark-colored crossovers that blended into one another. He saw dozens every day while driving between the Hotel Victoria's office and Daniel's temporary workspace. But this one appeared 3 times before noon. Once outside the Harbor Grand, again near the courthouse, then parked half a block behind Victoria's office. He didn't panic. He simply wrote down the license plate. Years in compliance had taught him one lesson above all others. Never ignore coincidence. Never immediately call it evidence. Record it. Then wait. Daniel glanced at the note Brandon handed him. "You think you're being followed?" "I don't know." "You saw the same vehicle 3 times?" "Yes." Daniel nodded. "Good." Brandon looked surprised. "Good. You noticed." He folded the paper and slipped it into a folder. "Most people wouldn't." Victoria looked up from her desk. "If it appears again..." "Photograph it. But don't approach anyone." Brandon nodded. "I'm not looking for confrontation." Victoria smiled faintly. "I know. That's one of the reasons you're still ahead." By lunchtime, Daniel had received another package of financial records. This time, the documents came from public property filings. He spread aerial photographs across the conference table. There are 3 commercial properties: the warehouse in Tacoma, an office suite in Bellevue, And a storage facility near Kent. Brandon studied the addresses. They're all connected. Financially. Daniel pointed toward another chart. Each property belongs to a different company. But every company ultimately traces back through the same registered agent. Ethan's network. Victoria frowned. Has anyone actually conducted business from the Bellevue office? Daniel smiled. Interesting question. He opened another report. Utility usage, electricity, water, internet. The monthly activity was almost non-existent. So nobody works there? Apparently not. Then why lease office space? Daniel shrugged. Sometimes appearances matter. That afternoon, Brandon met with the forensic document examiner Victoria had hired. Her name was Dr. Linda Shaw. She had spent nearly 30 years examining questioned signatures for civil and criminal cases. She adjusted a powerful magnifying lens over Brandon's mortgage paperwork. I'll need several days. What are you looking for? Natural writing habits. She pointed toward his authentic signature. Nobody signs their name exactly the same way twice. But genuine signatures follow predictable movement. She moved to the disputed document. Forged signatures often copy appearance. They rarely copy rhythm. Brandon listened carefully. So you'll know? She smiled. I'll know whether the signatures deserve further challenge. She made no promises. He appreciated that. Late that evening, Brandon finally visited his sister. Megan opened the front door before he reached the porch. Without saying a word, she hugged him. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. You've lost weight, she finally said. I've been busy. You've forgotten to eat. He smiled weakly. You always notice. Inside the house smelled of fresh bread. Her 2 children were spending the weekend with their father, leaving the home unusually quiet. She placed a bowl of soup in front of him. Eat. He obeyed. Only after several minutes did she ask the question she had been holding back. How bad is it? Brandon rested his spoon. Worse than I thought. The affair. He hesitated. It isn't only the affair anymore. He briefly described the hidden companies, the unexplained transfers, the questionable mortgage documents. Megan listened without interrupting. When he finished, she remained silent for a long moment. Then she asked one question. Did Aurora ever seem interested in business before Ethan came along? Brandon thought back. No. Investments? No. Corporate structures? Never. Megan leaned back. Then someone taught her. The observation struck him. It wasn't evidence, but it fit what Daniel had suggested. Aurora might not have created the system. She may have stepped into one that already existed. The following morning, Daniel called before sunrise. I need you here. Now. As soon as possible. Brandon arrived 25 minutes later. Daniel already had several monitors running. I finally traced one of the larger transfers. Where did it end? It didn't. Brandon frowned. What do you mean, it came back? Daniel rotated the screen. Money left Brandon and Aurora's joint account. Moved through North Cascade Capital. Passed into Harbor Ridge. Transferred through Blue Summit Holdings. Then, months later, returned. Not to Brandon. Not to Aurora. To Ethan Brooks personally. As a management distribution. Daniel highlighted the total. $196,000. The room fell silent. Victoria arrived moments later. Daniel summarized the findings. She stared at the screen. So, marital funds eventually became Ethan's personal income. It appears so. Brandon felt something cold settle inside him. Until now, the numbers had seemed abstract. Now they had an owner. Victoria slowly closed the file. We need immediate preservation orders. Daniel nodded. And possibly subpoenas. Brandon looked between them. What happens if Ethan starts destroying records? Victoria answered calmly. That's exactly why we move now. She picked up the phone. Within the hour, motions had been prepared requesting preservation of relevant financial evidence. It wasn't a victory, it was protection. Just after lunch, Brandon's phone vibrated. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Instead, he answered. Brandon Flores. A woman spoke quietly. You don't know me. He waited. My name isn't important. His expression hardened. What do you want? I worked for Harbor Ridge. He remained silent. I resigned 3 months ago. Another pause. I've seen the news about your divorce filing. Brandon glanced toward Victoria's office. What does that have to do with me? You deserve to know something. His pulse slowed. What? There are files. What files? Accounting backups. He reached for a pen. Where? I can't tell you over the phone. Why not? Because if someone realizes I contacted you. Her voice trembled. I'll lose more than my job. Brandon chose his next words carefully. Are you asking to meet? Yes. Public place. Daytime. No lawyers. No police. He looked through the conference room glass toward Victoria. I can't agree to that. The caller sighed. I thought you might say that. Before hanging up, she said one final sentence. Whatever Ethan told Aurora. He wasn't the one making the biggest decisions. The line went dead. Brandon immediately walked into Victoria's office. He repeated every word from memory. Daniel listened without speaking. When Brandon finished, Victoria wrote one name at the top of a legal pad. Unknown former employee. Then she underlined another sentence. He wasn't the one making the biggest decisions. Daniel leaned back slowly. If that's true. He looked at the network diagram covering the wall. We've been looking at the middle of the organization. Victoria met his eyes. Not the top. Brandon stared at the web of companies connected by dozens of blue lines. For the first time, Ethan Brooks no longer looked like the architect of everything. He looked like someone who might have been answering to someone else. And somewhere beyond the shell, companies forged signatures, hidden transfers, and secret meetings. An unseen figure had just stepped into the edge of the investigation without revealing a name. The phone number could not be traced. Victoria tried anyway. Within an hour, she had confirmed only what Brandon already suspected. The number had been generated through an encrypted internet calling service. No subscriber information, no billing address, no identifiable owner. Whoever had called Brandon had taken precautions. That alone made the conversation more significant. Daniel stared at the whiteboard. If she was telling the truth, someone inside Harbor Ridge wants to talk. Victoria uncapped a marker. If she was lying, someone wants to distract us. She wrote 2 columns. Witness, distraction. We treat both possibilities equally. Brandon nodded. No assumptions. That principle had guided every step of the investigation so far. He had no intention of abandoning it now. The next morning began with unexpected news. Dr. Linda Shaw requested an in-person meeting. She rarely discussed preliminary findings over the phone. Brandon, Victoria, and Daniel met her at her laboratory just after 10. The office resembled a scientific research facility more than a traditional business. Microscopes, high-resolution scanners, specialized lighting equipment, rows of document storage cabinets. Linda placed 2 enlarged signature samples on a conference table, one authentic, one disputed. She adjusted her glasses. I've completed my preliminary examination. Nobody interrupted. The questioned signature demonstrates several characteristics inconsistent with Brandon's genuine writing habits. She pointed toward enlarged pen strokes. Natural hesitation, interrupted line quality. Slow construction. Then she indicated Brandon's authentic signature. This one was written from memory. She returned to the disputed document. This one appears to have been written from observation. Brandon remained perfectly still. Victoria asked carefully. Your opinion? Linda folded her hands. My preliminary conclusion is that the questioned signature is highly likely not genuine. Silence settled over the room. After several seconds, Brandon finally spoke. So someone probably signed my name. Linda answered cautiously. My final report will use precise language. But yes, I believe further legal examination is warranted. The drive back to Victoria's office felt strangely quiet. The affair had devastated Brandon emotionally. The financial records had shocked him intellectually. But the possibility that someone had forged his signature struck at something deeper. Identity, trust, control. Someone had attempted to become him. Not socially, legally. Daniel spent the afternoon reviewing mortgage payment histories. The loan wasn't immediately suspicious. He highlighted monthly payments. They were always made on time. Brandon frowned. Wouldn't that help hide it? Exactly. If nobody misses payments, nobody asks questions. Victoria looked across the table. The objective may never have been default. It may simply have been access to capital. Daniel nodded. A very expensive shortcut. Around 3 o'clock, Brandon received another text. Not from Aurora, not from Ethan. Unknown number, 1 sentence. Check your father's old workshop. No signature, no explanation. Brandon stared at the screen. Victoria immediately noticed. What is it? He handed her the phone. She read the message twice. Did your father own a workshop? Years ago. Where? Behind my parents' old house. Does anyone use it now? My mother sold the property after he passed away. When? 5 years ago? Daniel looked thoughtful. Could someone else be referring to something stored there? Brandon slowly shook his head. I don't know. Victoria refused to speculate. We verify first. She called a property records clerk. 20 minutes later, she had the answer. The workshop still existed. The new owners had converted the main house. The detached building remained untouched. Brandon looked surprised. It wasn't demolished. No. Victoria closed the file. Nens? Interesting. That afternoon, Brandon drove toward the neighborhood where he had grown up. Everything looked smaller than he remembered. The streets, the sidewalks, even the maple tree his father had planted beside the driveway seemed shorter. The current homeowners greeted him politely after he explained who he was. An older couple, friendly, curious. We've never done much with the workshop, the husband admitted. Mostly storage. Brandon explained that he hoped an old family item might still be inside. After several minutes, they agreed to let him look. The workshop smelled exactly as he remembered. Sawdust, motor oil, old cedar. Dust floated through narrow beams of afternoon sunlight. His father's workbench still stood against the far wall. The owners had covered it with moving boxes. Brandon smiled faintly. For a brief moment, the investigation disappeared. He remembered building birdhouses, repairing bicycles, learning to measure twice before cutting once. His father had believed patience solved more problems than speed. It was advice Brandon carried into adulthood. He slowly examined the room. Nothing appeared unusual. Then he noticed a loose wooden panel beneath the workbench. He knelt, lifted it carefully. Inside rested a small metal cash box. His pulse quickened. The box wasn't locked. Inside were several family photographs, old fishing licenses, a pocket knife, and a sealed envelope, written across the front in black ink, for Brandon. His hands froze. The handwriting belonged to his father. He looked toward the homeowners. Would you mind giving me a few minutes? They quietly stepped outside. Brandon carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. Most of it contained ordinary fatherly advice. Work hard. Protect your integrity. Take care of family. Then one paragraph caught his attention. If anyone ever asks you to sign something you don't fully understand, don't do it just because you trust them. Trust is earned repeatedly, not given permanently. Brandon closed his eyes. The timing felt almost impossible. His father had written those words years before any of this began. Yet they described his current situation perfectly. Folded behind the letter was another document. A copy of an old property partnership agreement, signed decades earlier. His father's signature appeared beside that of another investor. Brandon studied it. His father had always signed with bold, confident strokes, completely different from the hesitant imitation Brandon had seen on the mortgage papers. He carefully placed everything back into the envelope. Not because the documents were evidence, because they were family. When Brandon returned to Victoria's office, he described everything. She examined the old partnership agreement. This won't affect your current case. I know. But it reminded me of something. What? Brandon looked at the forged mortgage documents. My father always said integrity disappears one small compromise at a time. Daniel smiled quietly. Smart man. Late that evening, Daniel called unexpectedly. I think I found the missing link. Brandon immediately drove back to the office. Daniel had enlarged a corporate ownership chart across the main monitor. You were right. About what? Ethan wasn't at the top. Daniel zoomed into another filing obtained only hours earlier. One document had been overlooked because it wasn't filed under Harbor Ridge. It belonged to another corporation entirely. Cascade Asset Management Group, registered manager, a man named Richard Callahan. Neither Brandon nor Victoria recognized the name. Daniel clicked again. Richard Callahan owned controlling interests in Blue Summit Holdings, North Cascade Capital, and partial interests in Harbor Ridge Consulting. Brandon stared at the screen. So, Ethan worked for him, Daniel answered carefully. I can't say that. But financially, Ethan appears connected to someone much larger. Victoria slowly sat down. I've heard that name before. Both men turned toward her. She walked toward an old filing cabinet. After several minutes, she removed a thick archive folder. Across the front was a faded label. Callahan. Brandon felt the room grow noticeably quieter. You know him. Victoria looked at the folder without opening it. I represented a client against one of his companies 8 years ago. What happened? She hesitated. The client settled unexpectedly. Why? I never found out. Daniel looked from the folder to the ownership chart, then back again. It seems we just found the person we've been missing. Victoria finally opened the old file. Inside lay hundreds of pages that had not been touched in years. As she turned the first page, a familiar company name appeared almost immediately. North Cascade Capital. The same company Brandon believed had entered his life only 18 months earlier. Suddenly, it looked as though its history stretched back much further, and so did the man standing quietly behind it all. Victoria carried the aging case file into the conference room with unusual care. The cardboard folder had faded from years in storage, and several colored tabs protruded from its edges. Someone had handled it often once upon a time. Not recently. She placed it on the table without opening it immediately. I haven't looked at this in almost a decade. Daniel sat forward. Tell us what you remember. Victoria took a slow breath. My client owned a small manufacturing business. He claimed one of his investors quietly diverted company assets through a network of consulting firms. Brandon immediately looked toward the ownership chart. Consulting firms? Victoria nodded. At the time, we could never fully prove where the money went. She opened the file. The companies dissolved. The records disappeared. The case settled before discovery was complete. Daniel asked the obvious question. Was Richard Callahan involved? Victoria turned several pages. Finally, she stopped. There. A deposition transcript. Richard Callahan's name appeared repeatedly. Brandon read silently. Callahan had denied managing the companies directly. Instead, he described himself as an outside strategic advisor. Daniel smiled without humor. Convenient. For the next hour, they compared Victoria's old file with Daniel's current investigation. Different years, different businesses, different victims. Yet familiar patterns emerged. Small consulting agreements, layered ownership structures, repeated use of limited liability companies, property purchases, funds moving through multiple accounts before disappearing. Daniel circled several entries. This isn't proof of anything by itself. But it demonstrates consistency, Victoria agreed. If the same methods appear over many years, they become harder to dismiss as coincidence. Brandon remained quiet. The investigation no longer felt like a private divorce. It felt like he had accidentally walked into someone else's long-running operation. Late that afternoon, Daniel received another batch of corporate filings. He scanned them quickly before stopping. Interesting. Victoria looked up. What? I finally found Harbor Ridge's accountant. Who? Daniel rotated the monitor. The accounting firm wasn't large. It consisted of one certified public accountant, one office manager, and one junior bookkeeper, located in Bellevue. Victoria immediately wrote down the firm's name. We should preserve those records. Daniel nodded. If they're still available. Brandon noticed something else. The bookkeeping contract. Daniel enlarged it. Beginning date. 6 months before Aurora began authorizing transfers. Ending date. Still active. Brandon looked thoughtful. So somebody has complete financial records. Daniel smiled. Exactly. If those records still exist, then they'll tell us far more than the bank statements. The following morning, Brandon returned to the hotel after breakfast and found a plain white envelope resting beneath his door. No postage, no name, no return address. His pulse immediately slowed. He didn't touch it. Instead, he photographed it exactly where it lay. Then he called Victoria. What do you see? She asked. An envelope. Has anyone entered your room? I don't know. Leave everything exactly as it is. 25 minutes later, Victoria and Daniel arrived. Hotel management reviewed electronic key records. Only 3 entries had occurred since Brandon left. Housekeeping, maintenance, master management access. The manager insisted no employee had left an envelope. Brandon carefully opened it while wearing disposable gloves Daniel produced from his laptop bag. Inside rested one sheet of paper, nothing else. Typed in plain black letters. Stop looking. Some mistakes cannot be corrected. No signature, no fingerprints visible. Daniel immediately sealed the page inside a protective evidence sleeve. Victoria looked at Brandon. How do you feel? He surprised himself with the answer. More certain. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Why? Because someone believes we're close enough to matter. Nobody disagreed. That afternoon, Victoria contacted local law enforcement not to accuse anyone of a crime, but to document the anonymous message. She insisted on creating an official record. If something else happens later, there will already be a timeline. Brandon appreciated the advice. Every action remained measured, deliberate, professional. Exactly the opposite of how whoever sent the letter appeared to be behaving. Aurora called again that evening. This time Brandon answered. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Aurora whispered, I heard someone contacted you. Brandon's expression hardened. Who told you that? Silence. Then, Ethan. Brandon leaned back. So you're still talking? She hesitated. It's complicated. No? His voice remained calm. It's actually becoming much simpler. Aurora inhaled shakily. I never wanted this. What part? The affair. The companies. The mortgage. She began crying. I didn't know everything. Brandon closed his eyes. What did you know? Another long silence. When she finally answered, her voice barely carried through the speaker. I knew Ethan said Richard could help us build wealth. Richard, not Mr. Callahan. Just Richard. Brandon immediately noticed the familiarity. You've met him? Yes. How many times? I don't remember. He didn't believe that. Not because she was necessarily lying, because people remembered meeting influential strangers, especially those discussing large financial investments. Where? A restaurant. When? I don't know. Who else was there? Ethan. Anyone else? Silence again. Finally, I think, 2 lawyers. Brandon glanced toward the notebook lying beside him. He wrote every answer exactly as Aurora gave it. No interpretations, no conclusions, only facts. Before ending the call, she whispered, I really thought we were investing. He didn't answer. He simply ended the conversation. The next morning, Victoria reviewed Brandon's notes. You did well. I barely said anything. Exactly. She highlighted one sentence. Richard could help us build wealth. That's the first time Aurora has independently connected Richard Callahan to the financial activity. Daniel added another note. And apparently there were attorneys present. Brandon looked surprised. Does that matter? It might. If professionals attended meetings, there may be additional witnesses. Shortly after noon, Daniel received a secure email notification. He opened it. His expression immediately changed. What is it? Brandon asked. Daniel enlarged the message. It came from a commercial title company responding to one of his lawful public record requests. Attached were historical ownership documents for the Tacoma warehouse. The current owner wasn't Harbor Ridge. Not exactly. The property had changed hands 4 separate times. Every sale occurred between companies connected through Richard Callahan's business network. Purchase price, sale price, purchase again, sale again. Each transaction significantly increased the property's recorded value, despite almost no physical improvements. Daniel slowly leaned back. They've been inflating values. Victoria frowned. For financing? Possibly. Tax strategy? Possibly. Money movement? Possibly. Brandon studied the chain of transactions. The warehouse itself had hardly changed, yet on paper it had become dramatically more valuable every few years. He remembered something his father once taught him while restoring an old fishing boat. If someone spends more time polishing the paperwork than fixing the engine, look at the engine. Brandon suddenly realized they had spent weeks studying documents. Maybe it was time to understand what actually happened inside those buildings. Daniel seemed to reach the same conclusion. He quietly closed the ownership records, then looked directly at Brandon and Victoria. I think we've exhausted what paper alone can tell us. Victoria nodded slowly. What are you suggesting? Daniel pointed toward a photograph of the Tacoma warehouse pinned to the whiteboard. I think it's time we find out what that building is actually being used for. The room fell silent. For the first time since Brandon had walked into his own home and discovered the affair, the next step in the investigation would not begin with another bank statement or another legal filing. It would begin with a place. And whatever waited behind the warehouse doors had already convinced at least one anonymous stranger that Brandon needed to stop asking questions before it was too late. The warehouse looked different at night. During Brandon's first visit, it had appeared almost ordinary, an aging industrial building surrounded by trucking companies and storage lots. In daylight, its faded gray walls blended into the neighborhood. Now, beneath the glow of scattered security lights, every shadow seemed deeper. Every movement attracted attention. Victoria had made one rule absolutely clear. You are not investigators. You are not law enforcement. You are not going inside. Daniel agreed immediately. We observe. We document. We leave. Brandon had no intention of ignoring either instruction. Just after 8 that evening, the three of them parked separately on public streets surrounding the industrial district. Daniel carried binoculars and a camera with a telephoto lens. Victoria brought a legal pad. Brandon brought nothing except his phone. They communicated through a secure group chat. 8:17 p.m. One delivery truck entered. No visible company markings. 8:26 p.m. Truck departed. Loading dock remained closed. 8:41 p.m. White cargo van arrived. Driver entered through side door. Vehicle remained parked. Brandon watched from nearly 200 yards away. Everything appeared strangely efficient. Nobody lingered outside. Nobody smoked near the entrance. No conversations took place in the parking lot. People arrived, entered, left. It resembled a business trying very hard not to attract attention. Daniel sent another message. Notice the license plates. Brandon zoomed in carefully. Most vehicles were registered in Washington. One carried Oregon plates. Another came from Idaho. Nothing unusual by itself. Industrial companies often served multiple states. Still, Daniel photographed every vehicle. Facts first, conclusions later. Around 9:30, headlights swept across the parking lot. A black luxury sedan rolled slowly toward the building. Brandon recognized it immediately. Not because he had seen the vehicle before, because he recognized the driver, Richard Callahan. The photograph Daniel had obtained from corporate records matched perfectly. Mid-60s, silver hair, tailored navy overcoat, confident posture. Richard parked beside the entrance. Someone opened the warehouse door before he reached it. No knocking, no waiting. He disappeared inside within seconds. Daniel's message appeared almost instantly. Confirmed visual identification. Time 9:34 p.m., Victoria replied. Document only, no contact. Richard remained inside nearly an hour. When he finally emerged, he wasn't alone. 2 men accompanied him. One carried a leather briefcase. The other wheeled a small, locked equipment case. Brandon photographed the group as they crossed the parking lot. No illegal activity, no confrontation, only documentation. Richard spoke briefly with both men before leaving. The sedan disappeared into the night. Daniel waited another 15 minutes before sending his final message. Enough. Everyone leaves separately. The following morning, Daniel printed several photographs. He arranged them beside corporate ownership records. Interesting. Brandon looked closer. What? The man with the briefcase. Daniel enlarged the image. I've seen him before. Where? Daniel searched through hundreds of electronic files. Finally, he stopped. There. A conference photograph taken 3 years earlier. Richard Callahan stood beside several executives during a regional investment symposium. The same man appeared in the background. Name badge visible. Thomas Avery, Chief Financial Officer. Cascade Asset Management Group. Victoria folded her arms. So Richard wasn't meeting random visitors. He was meeting his executive team. Daniel nodded. Apparently. Just before noon, another surprise arrived. Aurora requested a meeting through her attorney. Not reconciliation, not counseling. A formal settlement discussion. Victoria read the letter carefully. They're moving faster than I expected. Why? They may believe we already know more than we actually do. Brandon looked toward the warehouse photographs. Maybe we do. Victoria smiled slightly. Never let the other side know exactly what you've learned. The settlement conference was scheduled for Friday afternoon. Neutral office, private conference rooms, both attorneys present, no media, no unnecessary conversation. Victoria prepared Brandon beforehand. They'll probably evaluate your emotional state. They'll ask indirect questions. They may try to discover what we've uncovered. So answer only what's necessary. No speeches, no accusations. Brandon nodded. I understand. Friday arrived under another blanket of Seattle rain. Aurora entered the conference room first. She looked exhausted. Her eyes carried the unmistakable signs of sleepless nights. For a brief moment, Brandon almost failed to recognize her. She had always carried herself confidently. Today she appeared uncertain. Her attorney introduced everyone. The meeting began professionally. Property division, temporary financial arrangements, scheduling, nothing unusual. Then Aurora quietly asked, "May Brandon and I have 5 minutes alone?" Victoria immediately answered. "No." Aurora looked disappointed. "I just want to apologize." Victoria remained calm. "Any conversation occurs with counsel present." Aurora lowered her eyes. "I understand." Negotiations continued another hour. Very little progress occurred. Then Ethan's name surfaced unexpectedly. Aurora's attorney said carefully, "My client maintains that Mr. Brooks handled the investment recommendations." Victoria responded immediately. "Your client signed financial authorizations. She acknowledges that. Then those authorizations remain relevant." The room fell silent again. Aurora finally spoke. "I trusted him." Nobody asked which him. The answer seemed obvious. After a short recess, Brandon stepped into the hallway to collect a cup of coffee. As he returned, he noticed a familiar figure standing near the elevators. Richard Callahan. For several seconds, neither man moved. Richard appeared completely composed, expensive charcoal suit, polished shoes, perfect posture. He smiled politely. "Mr. Flores?" Brandon stopped several feet away. "I don't believe we've met." "We haven't." Richard extended his hand. "I'm Richard Callahan." Brandon didn't shake it. Richard withdrew his hand without appearing offended. "I've heard quite a lot about you." Brandon answered evenly. "I imagine you have." Richard smiled again. "Ethan speaks highly of your professionalism." Brandon remained expressionless. "What do you want?" Richard glanced toward the conference rooms. "I happen to be in the building." Victoria stepped into the hallway at that exact moment. She immediately positioned herself beside Brandon. "Can I help you?" Richard turned politely. "You must be Victoria Bennett." "I am." "I've admired your work for years." Victoria's face revealed nothing. "If you represent someone involved in this matter, future communication goes through counsel." Richard inclined his head. "Of course." He reached into his jacket pocket. Not for a weapon, for a business card. He placed it gently on a nearby table instead of handing it directly to anyone. "If either of you wishes to discuss misunderstandings, my office is always available." Without waiting for a response, he walked toward the elevators. The doors closed behind him. Only then did Victoria pick up the card. She read it silently, then turned it over. Blank. No handwritten note, nothing hidden. Just a name. Richard Callahan, Managing Director, Cascade Asset Management Group. Back inside the conference room, Victoria said nothing about the hallway encounter. Not immediately. The negotiations concluded without agreement. As Brandon and Victoria walked toward the parking garage afterward, she finally spoke. "He wanted us to know he isn't hiding." Brandon considered that. "Or he wanted us to think he isn't." Victoria nodded. "Exactly. Daniel was waiting at the office when they returned." Brandon described every word of the conversation. Daniel looked thoughtful. "He approached you voluntarily?" "Yes." "No threats?" "No." "No attempt to deny knowing Ethan?" "No." Daniel slowly leaned back. "That's interesting." Victoria looked at him. "Why?" "Because people usually avoid investigations." He glanced at Richard's business card lying on the conference table. But Richard Callahan just walked directly into ours. Nobody spoke for several moments. Outside rain continued tapping softly against the office windows. Inside, Brandon stared at the card. It felt less like an introduction, and more like the opening move in a conversation Richard had been expecting to have all along. Richard Callahan's business card remained on Victoria's desk long after everyone had gone home. Nobody touched it. Nobody threw it away. It represented something none of them had expected: confidence. Most people connected to a legal dispute tried to remain invisible. They avoided unnecessary meetings. They spoke through attorneys. They revealed as little as possible. Richard had done the opposite. He had introduced himself, voluntarily. The question was why. Saturday morning began with another strategy meeting. Victoria stood before the whiteboard reviewing everything they knew. Let's forget assumptions for a moment. She drew 3 circles: Aurora, Ethan, Richard. Now tell me only what we can actually prove. Daniel spoke first. Ethan has ownership interests connected to Harbor Ridge. Victoria wrote it down. Good. Brandon added. Aurora signed financial authorization documents. Another note. Daniel continued. Richard holds controlling interests in multiple companies connected through public filings. Victoria nodded. And we observed Richard entering the Tacoma warehouse. She added the final point. Then she stepped back. What can't we prove? The silence lasted several seconds. Finally, Brandon answered. Intent. Victoria smiled. Exactly. We have relationships. We have documents. We have financial movement. But we still don't know everyone's intentions. Daniel spent the morning reviewing security camera timestamps from Brandon's home. Not because they expected new footage, because he wanted to compare access records with financial transactions. Hours later, he noticed something unusual. Brandon. What? Look at this. Guest access activated. February 14th, 9:12 a.m. The code remained active for 38 minutes. Daniel opened banking records. The same morning, $45,000 had moved through North Cascade Capital. Brandon frowned. You think they're connected? I don't know. Daniel enlarged the timeline. But they happened within an hour. Victoria refused to jump ahead. Correlation isn't causation. Daniel nodded immediately. I agree. But it's worth documenting. Another entry joined the growing timeline covering one wall of the office. Around noon, Brandon finally did something he had avoided for weeks. He visited his mother. Maria Flores opened the door with tears already forming in her eyes. She embraced him tightly. I've been praying for you. I know. She stepped back and studied his face. You look tired. I probably am. She led him into the kitchen where coffee was already waiting. Neither of them mentioned Aurora at first. Instead, they talked about ordinary things: the garden, his nieces, the Mariners, the weather. Only after nearly half an hour did Maria quietly ask, Do you want to tell me what really happened? Brandon didn't describe the affair in detail. He simply explained that trust had been broken. Then he summarized the financial investigation. His mother listened carefully. When he finished, she surprised him. Your father met Richard Callahan once. Brandon looked up sharply. What? It was years ago. I'd forgotten until you mentioned the name. His pulse quickened. When? I don't remember exactly. Maybe 12, 13 years ago. What happened? Maria searched her memory. Your father came home angry. He said someone wanted investors to sign documents too quickly. Brandon leaned forward. Did he say Richard's name? I'm almost certain. He told me, she closed her eyes, trying to remember, that some businessman smiled too much. Brandon almost laughed. That sounded exactly like something his father would have said. Did Dad ever work with him? No. He refused. Why? Maria answered without hesitation. He said he never trusted anyone who discouraged questions. Brandon drove back to Victoria's office with his father's words echoing in his mind. Never trust anyone who discourages questions. He immediately wrote down everything his mother remembered. Victoria read the notes carefully. It's not evidence. I know. But it's useful context. Daniel looked thoughtful. If Richard approached your father years ago, he may have operated this way for a long time. Monday morning brought another development. The anonymous caller contacted Brandon again, this time through email. The message contained only 6 words. I can prove Richard was there. Attached was a photograph. Daniel enlarged it immediately. The image showed a private dining room inside an upscale Seattle restaurant. Around the table sat 6 people. Ethan, Aurora, 2 unidentified men in suits, a woman Brandon didn't recognize, and at the head of the table, Richard Callahan. The photograph carried a timestamp from 18 months earlier. Victoria examined it closely. No obvious editing. Daniel zoomed into reflections, shadows, and metadata. So far, it appears authentic. Brandon looked at Aurora's face. She wasn't smiling. She appeared nervous. Richard, meanwhile, looked completely relaxed, almost as though he were conducting a meeting. The email included one final sentence. She never understood what she signed. Nobody spoke for several moments. Finally, Brandon broke the silence. If that's true, Victoria interrupted gently, we still verify. I know. But if it's true... He looked again at Aurora in the photograph. Then she may have believed she was participating in legitimate investments. Daniel remained cautious. Or she may not have. We simply don't know yet. Victoria saved the photograph to multiple secure locations, no matter what. This image establishes one important fact. Brandon looked at her. What fact? Richard, Aurora, and Ethan met together. That's independently consistent with what Aurora told you. Later that afternoon, another package arrived. This one came from the accounting firm Daniel had identified, not financial records, a letter. Their attorney explained that the firm had received legal preservation notices and intended to comply fully with applicable law. Daniel smiled. They're preserving everything. Victoria looked relieved. Good. If records still exist, they're less likely to disappear now. As evening approached, Brandon walked alone along Seattle's waterfront. The air smelled of salt and rain. Ferries crossed Elliott Bay in the distance. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't thinking about bank transfers or corporate filings. He was thinking about choices. Aurora had made choices. Ethan had made choices. Richard had made choices. Sooner or later, everyone involved would have to explain them. His phone vibrated. A message from Victoria. Need you back at the office. Immediately. No explanation, only urgency. 20 minutes later, Brandon entered the conference room. Daniel and Victoria were already waiting. Neither looked frightened. They looked focused. Victoria slid a freshly printed document across the table. It just arrived from the court. Brandon scanned the first page. The title caught his attention immediately. Motion to intervene. Filed not by Ethan, not by Aurora, but by Richard Callahan's legal team. Brandon looked up slowly. Why would he do that? Victoria met his eyes. Because... She tapped the filing with one finger. Richard Callahan is no longer acting like someone standing outside your divorce. He has formally asked the court to recognize that its outcome could directly affect his own legal interests. The room fell silent. For the first time, Richard had stepped out from behind the companies. The courtroom was unusually quiet for a Monday morning. Brandon sat beside Victoria, watching people file into the gallery one by one. Most were attorneys waiting for unrelated hearings. A few clients whispered nervously. Court staff moved with practiced efficiency, carrying stacks of files between chambers. Everything looked ordinary. Yet the document resting in front of Victoria suggested otherwise. Motion to intervene, filed by Richard Callahan. Brandon had never imagined that a man he had not known existed 2 weeks earlier would now be asking to participate in his divorce proceedings. Victoria leaned closer. Remember, we're only addressing procedural issues today. No testimony. No evidence. No surprises. Brandon nodded. Although after the previous few weeks, surprises seemed to arrive almost daily. Richard entered the courtroom exactly 3 minutes before the hearing began. He wasn't alone. 2 attorneys accompanied him. Both wore dark tailored suits and carried identical leather briefcases. Richard acknowledged Brandon with a slight nod. Nothing more. No smile. No attempt at conversation. Professional. Controlled. Victoria quietly observed them. They came prepared. Daniel, seated behind them, as an observer, whispered, "So did we." The judge reviewed the filings methodically. Richard's lead attorney stood first. "Your Honor, our client requests limited intervention solely because inaccurate allegations concerning his business interests may substantially affect ongoing commercial operations." Victoria rose immediately afterward. "Your Honor, Mr. Callahan is not a party to this marriage. He has not demonstrated any legal basis requiring intervention. The financial matters referenced remain under separate review." The judge listened without interruption. After nearly 40 minutes, he issued a temporary ruling. Motion denied without prejudice. Richard's attorneys could renew the request later if additional legal grounds emerged. Victoria remained expressionless until they left the courtroom. Only then did she allow herself a small smile. "That's exactly what we wanted." Brandon exhaled slowly. "So Richard stays out. For now." Outside the courthouse, Richard approached them again. This time he stopped several feet away. "Miss Bennett," Victoria answered politely. "Mr. Callahan." "I expected a stronger argument." Victoria smiled faintly. "I expected a better motion." For a brief moment, neither spoke. Then, Richard turned toward Brandon. "I truly am sorry your marriage ended this way." Brandon met his gaze. "My marriage isn't your concern." Richard tilted his head. "You may be surprised." Before anyone could respond, he continued walking toward a waiting sedan. Victoria watched until the vehicle disappeared into traffic. "He keeps trying to widen the conversation." Brandon frowned. "Why?" "Because he doesn't want us focusing on specific documents." Daniel nodded. "He wants us thinking about personalities." Victoria smiled. "We won't." Back at the office, Daniel had exciting news. The accounting firm responded. "They're willing to produce records." Brandon looked up. "Everything?" "Not immediately. But far more than I expected. Boxes of electronic files would be delivered over the next several days pursuant to the preservation requests. General ledgers, expense reports, internal invoices, communication logs." Victoria looked genuinely pleased. "This changes things." Daniel agreed. "Paper trails are difficult to argue with." 3 days later, the first encrypted hard drive arrived. Daniel carefully copied every file before opening anything. No original alterations. He insisted on preserving exact digital integrity. Hours passed as software organized thousands of accounting entries. Most were routine: office supplies, insurance premiums, rent, utilities. Then Daniel stopped typing. "What did you find?" Brandon asked. Daniel enlarged a spreadsheet: consulting expense, recurring monthly payment, recipient Harper Advisory Services. Brandon looked confused. I've never heard of them. Daniel searched state records. No active corporation. No registered business license. Victoria leaned closer. So, who received the money? Daniel clicked deeper. The banking destination belonged to a private investment account. Account holder, Richard Callahan. The room became silent. Unlike the previous ownership structures, there were no shell companies between Harbor Ridge and Richard. The money had gone directly to him. Daniel leaned back slowly. That's unusual. Victoria nodded. Very. Why? Brandon asked. Daniel pointed toward the transaction history. Whoever designed these structures usually layered payments. This one didn't. It went straight to Richard. Victoria folded her arms. Either someone became careless, or they weren't expecting anyone to see these records. As the afternoon continued, another discovery emerged. Emails. Thousands of archived business emails. Daniel filtered every message containing Richard's name. Hundreds appeared. Most involved meeting schedules, investment discussions, routine administration. Then one subject line caught Brandon's attention. Authorization required before Brandon returns. He stared at the screen. Daniel opened the message. The email came from Ethan to Aurora. Only 18 words. Richard wants everything completed before Brandon returns from Denver. Delete this after reading. Nobody spoke. Victoria quietly printed the page. Daniel immediately preserved the metadata. Brandon looked away from the monitor. His business trip to Denver, he remembered it clearly. A 4-day compliance conference. The same week the home equity loan documents had been finalized. Victoria broke the silence. This is important. Daniel nodded. It directly references Brandon's travel schedule. And Richard. Brandon felt anger rising for the first time in weeks. Not explosive anger. Something colder, more controlled. Someone had coordinated major financial decisions around his absence, intentionally. Late that evening, Aurora called again. This time Brandon almost ignored it. Instead, he answered. Her voice sounded exhausted. Did you see Richard today? Yes. I'm sorry. For what? I introduced Ethan to you. Brandon remained silent. I should never have done that. Another pause. I thought he was ambitious. I thought Richard was just another investor. Brandon finally asked the question that had been growing in his mind. When did you realize something wasn't right? Aurora didn't answer immediately. When Richard started asking whether you were traveling, Brandon's grip tightened around the phone. What? He always seemed interested in your work schedule. He'd ask Ethan when you'd be away. Brandon closed his eyes. When did that happen? Several times. Did you ever ask why? I did. What did he say? Aurora swallowed. He laughed. And he said, her voice trembled, successful business requires good timing. Brandon wrote every word into his notebook. Nothing more, nothing less. The following morning, Daniel entered carrying fresh coffee and a smile Brandon hadn't seen in days. I think we finally know why Richard approached you. Victoria looked up. Go on. Daniel displayed 2 timelines side by side. One showed Brandon's business travel. The other showed major financial transactions. The overlap was remarkable. Nearly every significant transfer occurred while Brandon was attending conferences, inspections, or federal meetings outside Seattle. Daniel circled the pattern. Richard wasn't interested in Brandon personally. He was interested in Brandon's predictable absences. Victoria slowly nodded. So, Brandon's career created opportunities, Daniel answered quietly. Exactly. Brandon stared at the timeline. For years, he had believed his dedication to work protected his family. Instead, someone had quietly learned to use that dedication against him. Victoria closed the file. We're getting close. Brandon looked at her. To what? She glanced toward the growing mountain of evidence covering the conference room. To understanding the entire system. At that exact moment, Daniel's computer emitted a sharp notification. Another encrypted email had arrived from the anonymous former Harbor Ridge employee. This one contained no message, only a single attachment, a calendar invitation, meeting location Pier 56, tomorrow, 7:00 p.m., and beneath it one sentence, "If you want the truth, come alone." The conference room fell silent. Everyone stared at the calendar invitation on Daniel's monitor. Pier 56, 7:00 p.m. Come alone. Victoria was the first to speak. You're not going. Brandon looked at her. If this person really worked for Harbor Ridge, Victoria interrupted. If. She emphasized the word. We still don't know who sent these messages. Daniel enlarged the email header. No useful routing information. Same encrypted service. He leaned back. The sender knows how to avoid identification. Brandon folded his arms. So, what do we do? Victoria answered without hesitation. We prepare. The rest of the afternoon became an exercise in planning, not surveillance, not a sting operation. Preparation. Victoria outlined every possibility on the whiteboard. Scenario 1. The meeting was genuine. Scenario 2. Someone wanted information from Brandon. Scenario 3. Someone wanted to intimidate him. Scenario 4. Someone wanted to test whether he would come alone. Daniel added another point. No matter what happens, we don't manufacture evidence. We observe. We document. We leave if anything feels wrong. Brandon agreed. I understand. The following morning, Brandon received another unexpected call. This time it came from Detective Laura Mitchell of the Seattle Police Department. She referred to the anonymous letter left at Brandon's hotel. We've completed the initial examination. Brandon listened carefully. Did you find anything? Very little. The paper and toner are commercially available. No usable fingerprints. No DNA suitable for comparison. She paused. However, Brandon waited. The hotel security footage shows someone wearing a baseball cap and rain jacket entering the hallway shortly before the envelope appeared. Can you identify the person? No. The face never becomes visible. She continued. I'm not saying the letter is connected to your civil matter, but if you receive any additional anonymous communications, please let us know. I will. After the call ended, Brandon immediately informed Victoria. She nodded approvingly. Good. We continue documenting everything. That afternoon, Aurora sent a message unlike any of the previous ones. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't an apology. It contained only one question. Did Richard contact you directly? Brandon forwarded it to Victoria. She read it twice. Interesting. Should I answer? No. Why? Because we don't know why she's asking. Daniel added, if Richard contacted her recently, she may be trying to measure what you know. Brandon locked his phone. No response. By 6:30 the following evening, Seattle's waterfront was wrapped in a cool mist. Tourists still wandered between restaurants and souvenir shops, but the crowds had begun to thin. Pier 56 remained busy enough that Brandon wouldn't stand out. Exactly as Victoria had wanted. He arrived 10 minutes early, not alone. Victoria and Daniel remained several blocks away in separate public locations. Neither could hear Brandon's conversations. Neither intended to intervene unless absolutely necessary. This wasn't an investigation, it was simply a precaution. Brandon walked slowly along the pier. Fishing boats rocked gently against their moorings. The smell of salt water mixed with grilled seafood drifting from nearby restaurants. At precisely 7 o'clock, a woman approached. Late 30s, dark raincoat, Shoulder-length brown hair. She carried no purse, no briefcase, only a folded manila envelope. She stopped several feet away. "Mr. Flores?" "Yes." "My name is Emily Carter." "So you are the one who contacted me?" She nodded. "I worked for Harbor Ridge." Brandon remained calm. "What did you do there?" "Accounting support." "For how long?" "Almost 2 years." She glanced around the pier. "I'm not staying long." Brandon noticed her hands trembling slightly. "You said you had proof." "I do." She handed him the envelope. "I copied these before I resigned." He didn't open it immediately. "What are they?" "Internal payment approvals." "Signed meeting summaries?" "Expense authorizations." She looked directly at him. "Richard approved almost everything." Brandon asked carefully, "What about Ethan?" "Ethan managed daily operations." "And Aurora?" Emily hesitated. "She attended meetings." "Did she know what was happening?" Emily looked away toward Elliott Bay. "I honestly don't know." She asked questions. Sometimes Richard answered. Sometimes he didn't. Brandon listened without interrupting. Emily continued. "There were meetings after she left. Different meetings. Different people." "What kind of people?" "I don't know." "I handled paperwork. Not strategy." Brandon finally asked, "Why come forward now?" Emily's answer came immediately. "Because your name kept appearing." She swallowed. "I realized someone was using a man who wasn't even in the room." A ferry horn echoed across the water. Emily looked at her watch. "I have to go." Brandon nodded. "One last question," she stopped. "Are you in danger?" Emily smiled sadly. "I don't know." Then she disappeared into the evening crowd. Brandon made no attempt to follow. 20 minutes later, the three of them reunited at Victoria's office. Only then did Brandon open the envelope. Inside were copies of meeting agendas, expense summaries, internal authorization forms. None appeared sensational at first glance. Then Daniel stopped on one page. "Wait." He enlarged a scanned memorandum. "Meeting attendees: Richard Callahan, Thomas Avery, Ethan Brooks, Olivia Mercer, Aurora Flores." One attendee line remained blank. "Name withheld." Victoria frowned. "Withheld?" Daniel zoomed further. Someone had covered the final name with a thick black rectangle before making the copy. Emily had apparently copied the document after it had already been redacted. Brandon looked through the remaining pages. Another document, another redacted name, then another. Always the same position, always hidden. Victoria tapped the page thoughtfully. Someone didn't want copies identifying every participant. Daniel nodded. "But they forgot something." "What?" Daniel pointed toward the bottom of the memorandum. "Prepared by Executive Assistant J. Reynolds." He immediately searched the remaining documents. The same assistant's initials appeared dozens of times. Victoria smiled. "If J. Reynolds prepared the originals, there's a chance complete versions still exist." Brandon leaned forward. "So we finally have another person to identify." Daniel nodded. "And possibly someone who knows exactly what happened in those meetings." Victoria carefully placed the copied documents into evidence folders. "We're getting closer." Brandon looked once more at the heavily redacted attendee list. For weeks, every answer had uncovered another name. Now one final name remained deliberately hidden beneath a strip of black ink. Whoever J. Reynolds had protected might be the one person capable of explaining why Brandon's marriage had become entangled in a financial scheme that seemed far larger than anyone had first imagined. The black rectangle covering the final attendee's name became the center of attention. Daniel projected the scanned memorandum onto the conference room wall. Every person leaned forward. Richard Callahan, Thomas Avery, Ethan Brooks, Olivia Mercer, Aurora Flores. Then name withheld, prepared by J. Reynolds. Victoria folded her arms. We're not trying to guess the missing name. Daniel nodded. We identified J. Reynolds first. Brandon agreed. If the assistant prepared the originals, they may know who attended every meeting. For the next hour, they searched publicly available records, corporate directories, archived business registrations, professional networking sites, executive assistants, administrative coordinators. Eventually, Daniel stopped scrolling. I found someone. He enlarged the profile. Julia Reynolds, Executive Administrative Specialist. Previously employed by Cascade Asset Management Group. Employment ended 11 months earlier. Victoria immediately made another note. When did Emily resign? Daniel checked his timeline. 3 months ago. So Julia left first. Victoria looked thoughtful. That could matter. Daniel requested additional public records while Victoria reviewed archived litigation involving Cascade Asset Management. Brandon focused on another question. If Julia left almost a year ago, why would someone redact her meeting records afterward? Nobody answered immediately. Finally, Victoria said, because the documents continued circulating. Someone may have wanted to conceal identities before sharing copies. Daniel added, or before destroying originals. Again, nobody assumed either explanation was correct. Both possibilities joined the growing list. Late that afternoon, another email arrived from Emily Carter. This one contained no attachments, only a short message. Don't contact me again. I gave you everything I safely could. Brandon read it twice. Victoria nodded. We respect that. No follow-up, no. If she's frightened, pressuring her helps no one. Daniel archived the email with the others. At least now we know she reached out voluntarily. The following morning, Daniel received a response from one of his public records requests. Julia Reynolds had recently purchased a condominium in Portland. Her forwarding address was publicly available through property filings. Victoria studied the document. We're not contacting her. Brandon looked surprised. We're not. Not yet. Why? Because we don't know whether she wants to be found. Daniel agreed. If she left quietly. A surprise visit could accomplish the opposite of what we want. Brandon accepted the reasoning. The investigation had progressed precisely because they resisted acting impulsively. There was no reason to change that now. That afternoon, Brandon attended another scheduled settlement conference. This one was shorter, more focused. Property inventories, retirement accounts, house valuation. The atmosphere remained professional. Aurora looked healthier than she had the previous week, though the exhaustion remained visible in her eyes. Near the end of the meeting, she asked one unexpected question. Can I say something? Both attorneys looked toward the mediator, who nodded. Aurora turned toward Brandon. I know an apology doesn't change anything. Brandon remained silent. But there's something I need you to understand. Victoria didn't interrupt. Aurora continued. I lied to you. The room became very still. I lied about Ethan. I lied about where I was. I lied about the meetings. Tears formed in her eyes. But I never believed anyone was trying to steal from you. She looked directly at Brandon. I believed Richard. What exactly did he tell you? Brandon asked calmly. He said everything was structured for tax efficiency. And Ethan? He agreed. Did you ever read every document before signing? Aurora lowered her head. No. Why not? I trusted them. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Brandon asked one final question. Did Richard ever ask you not to tell me about the meetings? Aurora answered almost immediately. Yes. Victoria's pen stopped moving. What exactly did he say? Aurora closed her eyes, recalling the conversation. He said, Brandon's work keeps him busy. Don't burden him with investment details until everything is finalized. Brandon wrote the sentence into his notebook. Word for word, no commentary, no accusation, only the statement. After the conference ended, Victoria and Brandon walked toward the parking garage. "That answer matters," Victoria said, "because it describes Richard encouraging secrecy. Not necessarily fraud, but secrecy." Daniel, who had joined them outside, nodded. "And it independently matches the timeline of Brandon's business travel. Another piece, another connection, still no conclusions. Only facts becoming increasingly consistent." 2 days later, Dr. Linda Shaw delivered her final forensic report. Victoria gathered everyone in the conference room before opening it. Linda's conclusions were careful and technical. The questioned mortgage signature displayed significant characteristics inconsistent with Brandon Flores' known handwriting. The report stopped short of declaring intentional forgery as a legal conclusion. Instead, it stated that Brandon was highly unlikely to have written the signature himself. Victoria closed the report. "This will become important." Brandon nodded quietly. He already knew. The affair had destroyed his marriage. This document challenged the legitimacy of major financial obligations created in his name. That evening, Daniel continued reviewing Emily's copied documents. He nearly overlooked one handwritten note clipped to the back of an expense summary. Only 3 lines appeared. "Conference room B reserved. Executive review. Ask JR to prepare both attendance lists." Daniel froze. "Both attendance lists." Victoria looked over his shoulder. "Meaning, there may have been 2 versions. A complete list. And a redacted version." Brandon leaned closer. "If that's true, the original might still exist somewhere." Daniel smiled for the first time all day. "Exactly." He immediately searched every document Emily had provided. No original list appeared, but another clue did. A document archive reference, ER47A. Victoria circled the code. "That looks like an internal filing number." Daniel nodded. If Cascade kept organized archives, ER47A may point to an original record. Brandon looked around the room. "So what do we do now?" Victoria carefully placed the report, the copied memorandum, and the archive reference into a single evidence folder. "We've spent weeks reconstructing pieces." She looked at both men. "I think we're finally close to locating the original records." Just then, Daniel's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. His expression changed immediately. "What is it?" Brandon asked. Daniel slowly turned the phone around. An email had arrived from the accounting firm. The subject line contained only 4 words: "Additional records located." And beneath it, one sentence made everyone in the room fall silent. "Included are executive meeting archives requested under preservation." If the attachment contained what they hoped it did, the missing names might no longer be missing. Nobody spoke as Daniel downloaded the encrypted archive. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 5%, 12, 28. For the first time since Brandon had walked into his own bathroom and discovered Aurora with Ethan, the room wasn't filled with theories. It was filled with anticipation. Victoria finally broke the silence. "Remember, no matter what's inside, we verify everything." Daniel nodded. "Always." The download completed. He created a forensic copy before opening the files. "Original preserved," he said. "Working copy ready?" Only then did he double-click the archive. Hundreds of folders appeared: meeting agendas, quarterly financial summaries, board presentations, expense approvals, travel reimbursements, executive calendars. Daniel searched for one code: ER47A. 3 results appeared. The first contained a room reservation. The second held catering invoices. The third, executive review attendance. Victoria leaned forward. "Open it." Daniel did. The document filled the screen. Unlike Emily Carter's copy, this version had no black rectangle. Every attendee was listed in full. Richard Callahan, Thomas Avery, Ethan Brooks, Olivia Mercer, Aurora Flores, Julia Reynolds. One final name appeared beneath them. Michael Donovan. Brandon frowned. "I've never heard of him." Neither had Victoria. Daniel immediately searched the archive. Dozens of documents appeared. Expense approvals, meeting schedules, corporate correspondence. Michael Donovan's title appeared repeatedly. Director of Strategic Finance, Cascade Asset Management Group. Victoria slowly sat back. So the missing name wasn't another investor? Daniel nodded. It was the financial director. Brandon studied the list again. So why redact him? Victoria answered thoughtfully. Maybe because he knew more than everyone else. Daniel continued searching. Within minutes, he found another folder containing executive meeting minutes. Most pages summarized ordinary business topics: property acquisitions, cash flow projections, consulting contracts. Then one paragraph caught everyone's attention. Richard Callahan. All authorizations must be completed during BF's scheduled travel to avoid unnecessary review delays. The room became completely silent. Nobody needed to ask what BF meant. Brandon looked at Victoria. "That's me." She nodded slowly. "It certainly appears to be." Daniel enlarged the document. The initials appeared nowhere else. Only that one sentence, only that one instruction. Brandon felt the last lingering doubt disappear. His travel schedule hadn't merely been convenient, it had been incorporated into planning. Victoria printed the page immediately. "We'll authenticate it before relying on it," Daniel added. "The metadata matches the archive. No signs of alteration." Brandon remained focused on the wording. Avoid unnecessary review delays. Not because Brandon would certainly stop the transactions, because he might ask questions. His father had been right. Some people feared questions more than answers. Another folder revealed travel reimbursement records. Richard, Thomas, Michael, Ethan. The four men had attended numerous conferences together over 6 years. Aurora's name appeared only twice, both during the 18-month period when the financial transfers began. Daniel pointed at the timeline. "She's present late." Victoria nodded. Meaning the structure already existed before she became involved. Brandon looked quietly at the screen. It didn't erase Aurora's responsibility. She had still chosen to lie. She had still betrayed their marriage. But the record suggested she had entered an existing system rather than creating it. Facts mattered, even when they complicated emotions. Late that afternoon, Aurora's attorney called Victoria. "My client wishes to supplement her financial disclosure." Victoria remained calm. What changed? She recently discovered additional investment correspondence. "I'll accept production through normal procedures." The call ended after less than 5 minutes. Brandon looked up. "What does that mean?" Victoria answered carefully. "It means Aurora is providing more documents voluntarily." "Is that good?" "It can be. It can also be strategic. We'll evaluate the documents first." The supplemental production arrived the following morning. Among routine emails sat one unsigned memorandum. The author wasn't identified. The recipients included Ethan and Aurora. The final paragraph read, "Do not involve Brandon until all restructuring is complete. Questions at this stage will only slow implementation." Daniel compared the language with the executive meeting minutes. "Very similar," Victoria agreed. "Consistent wording." Brandon quietly closed the file. For months, perhaps longer, people had discussed keeping him uninformed. Not because he was hostile, because he was thorough. That afternoon, Detective Laura Mitchell requested a meeting. She arrived at Victoria's office carrying a slim folder. "I'm not here regarding your divorce." Victoria nodded. "We understand." The detective placed several photographs on the table. "We've received information concerning unrelated commercial record reviews." She chose her words carefully. "I'm not asking for privileged material. I'm simply confirming whether Richard Callahan and Ethan Brooks are individuals you've encountered," Victoria answered truthfully. "Yes." The detective made a note. "Thank you." She gathered her folder but paused before leaving. "I'll say one thing." Everyone looked at her. "If additional official requests arrive, respond promptly." She offered nothing more, no explanation, no accusations, just professional advice. After she left, Daniel looked toward Victoria. "Sounds like someone else has started asking questions." Victoria nodded. "It does." Several days later, the mediation resumed. This time, the atmosphere was noticeably different. Aurora appeared calmer, almost resigned. When the formal session concluded, the mediator asked whether either party wished to make a personal statement before finalizing the remaining schedule. Brandon looked across the table. For the first time in weeks, he didn't see only the woman who had betrayed him. He saw someone whose own decisions had led her into consequences she clearly hadn't anticipated. He spoke quietly. "I trusted you." Aurora nodded, tears forming. "I know. I can't change what happened. Neither can you." She whispered, "I'm sorry." "I believe you are." He paused. "But being sorry isn't the same as rebuilding trust." Aurora lowered her eyes. "I understand." There was no anger left in Brandon's voice, only acceptance. The mediator ended the session. The attorneys collected their files. Life moved forward. That evening, Brandon returned to the waterfront alone. The same pier, the same ferries crossing Elliott Bay, the same cool breeze drifting in from the bay. Weeks earlier, he had stood there searching for answers. Now he understood something much more important. The affair had never been only about betrayal. The financial scheme had never been only about money. Both had depended on the same fragile foundation: trust given without verification. His father's handwritten letter came back to him once again. Trust is earned repeatedly, not given permanently. He smiled sadly. It had taken losing almost everything to fully understand those words. His phone vibrated. A message from Victoria. One sentence. "Court approved tomorrow's final scheduling order." Brandon looked across the water before typing his reply. "Thank you. I'll be there." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. The future remained uncertain. There would still be hearings, financial disputes, legal questions that might continue long after the divorce became final. But for the first time since opening the bathroom door that rainy afternoon, Brandon no longer felt trapped by the past. He had walked into his home expecting an ordinary evening. Instead, he had uncovered lies that reached far beyond his marriage. He couldn't choose what had happened to him. He could choose what happened next. And as the Seattle skyline began reflecting the last light of sunset across Elliott Bay, Brandon turned away from the water and walked toward the future, no longer searching for revenge, but determined to rebuild a life founded on the one thing no forged signature, hidden account, or broken promise could ever permanently take from him: his integrity. Every storm in life leaves us with a choice. We can become bitter because of the people who betrayed us, or we can become wiser because of the lessons they taught us. Brandon's story reminds us that trust is one of the most valuable gifts we can give. But true trust should never require us to ignore our instincts, silence our questions, or abandon our own judgment. Love without honesty cannot survive. Success without integrity will eventually collapse, and no amount of money influence or deception can permanently hide the truth from those who have the courage to face it. Perhaps the greatest victory in this story wasn't exposing lies or uncovering hidden financial schemes. It was Brandon's decision not to let betrayal define the rest of his life. He refused to become consumed by revenge. Instead, he chose dignity over anger, truth over denial, and integrity over resentment. That's a choice every one of us can make, no matter what challenges we face. Sometimes losing the wrong people is the first step toward finding peace, rebuilding confidence, and creating a future built on honesty instead of illusion. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of an important lesson in your own life, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think is the most important lesson Brandon learned? Your perspective might inspire someone else who needs encouragement today. And if you enjoy powerful stories about resilience, justice, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next inspiring story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.